The sky had stopped pretending it belonged to us. It sat low and flat, a permanent bruise of muted orange and iron dust, the color of rust and old fire. Once, I'd looked up and taken for granted that somewhere beyond the haze there was blue, a wide, breathing blue that meant summer and rain and airplanes. But those colors folded away like pages torn from a book. Now the light that touched the world was thin and metallic. It made concrete look like bone and glass, like the surface of a dead eye. The city I remember is a phantom. Streets that used to hum with traffic are riven with fissures, buckled by heat and the slow, stubborn creep of the earth shifting under too much sun. Skyscrapers stand like hollowed teeth, windows gone, frames exposed to the wind that carries sand and the smell of burnt paper. Malls have become skeletons. Parks are graves of dried grass and brittle swing chains that sing in the wind. Signs with corporate logos hang askew, their slogans sun-bleached into mockery. Refresh above a dry fountain. Home above a house whose roof collapsed in on itself. Water is the first absence everyone notices. Rivers are memory-streaked scars. The waterfronts where I once watched barges now lie white and cracked. Gulls pecking at salt pans that used to be deep and wide. Reservoirs have receded into concentric muddy rings like wounds. The public pools, lines of blue tiles that used to glisten in neighborhood photographs, are dust bowls where weeds grow. Wells that were once communal heritage are dead or poisoned. Hand pumps click uselessly when someone remembers to test them. Rain is a rumor now, a headline from another era. The clouds that come wear ash and the occasional sulphurous stink. And when they open, it's rarely mercy. A brief, sharp deluge that turns streets into brown torrents and leaves a sticky, unusable sludge. Heat is a presence, not a season. Summers no longer cycle into fall. The thermostat of the world broke and stuck. Asphalt breathes heat. Concrete shimmers. Machines that were never meant to run without rest cough and stop. Solar panels accumulate grit and lose their hunger for light. People learn to live at odd hours. Pre-dawn scavengers. Twilight barter. But even the night is hot. A warm blanket that never cools. Fires are constant hazards now. A stray ember, a forgotten camp stove. A lightning strike from a cloud that has forgotten how to be gentle. Whole neighborhoods have been cremated into char and ruin, their outlines visible only to those who knew them by heart. The flora and fauna retreated or turned to ghosts. Trees that once lined boulevards became charcoal silhouettes, their roots sighing in the hard, nutrient-starved soil. Birds that used to crowd the power lines are fewer. Their songs are thinner, as if each note cost them something. Rats and coyotes have learned new rules. They come in daylight, bolder because there is less to fear. In some places, the sea rose and ate coastal neighborhoods, returning them as brackish marsh, walled by new cliffs of debris. In others, the ocean retreated, revealing wrecked piers and the bones of ships half buried in silt. What we called governments blurred and fell into layers. First came the rationing and the curfews, then the quiet collapse of services people assumed were permanent. No sanitation schedules, no reliable power grids, no hospitals with full staff. In some regions, a ragged version of order persists. Enclaves with generators and guarded perimeters, councils that trade security for obedience. But they are islands. Elsewhere, the vacuum filled with smaller authorities, gangs that call themselves militias, scavenger crews with flags of patched cloth, merchants who run markets under the rules of barter and intimidation. The sirens that used to mark emergencies are either repurposed as alarms for theft or broken and silent. Survivor groups have become the most stable institutions. Loose alliances built on necessity and memory. There are the traders, a network of caravans that moves along forgotten highways carrying seeds, batteries, and canned food. There are the broadcasters, thin, stubborn stations that keep a human voice on the air, promising information or companionship in the static. There are the collectors, people who can fix a pump, pull a tooth, or read a map. And then there are the predators, the ones who learn the new rules fastest. They move in trucks with reinforced grills and demand tolls at bridges that still stand, or they stage raids on anything that smells like a stockpile. Cities have turned into archipelagos of function. Where water can still be coaxed from the ground, communities gather. A well-guarded cluster of tents and tarps, a communal cooker, a board with names of those who can be trusted. Outside those havens, the land is concession and contest. Roads that once meant movement now mean risk. A flat stretch of highway is the perfect place for an ambush or for a caravan to be spotted from a distance. People travel in small groups, with lookouts and plans for retreat. Everyone learns to move like the weather, slow when the heat is heavy, quick when the wind brings the first scratch of a dust storm. The small comforts that remain are more dangerous than you'd think. A surviving library becomes a prized source of paper to start fires. A church is as likely a shelter as a fortress. Schools are rooftops where someone trades lessons for a jar of rationed sugar. A single functioning pump turns a block into a city within a city. And with that comes the human mess. Bartering, alliances, jealousy, the small cruelty that becomes easier when you're hungry. There is a small, constant sound that binds the ruined city to the living. The radio. It is a low, crackling thread that connects us when roads don't, and when names and faces have been carried away. At night, with the generator humming like an old dog, we tune into voices that might be strangers or might be friends. The broadcasts keep us human by reminding us there are other people in the dark, other mouths moving under the same hard sky. It is a fragile thing, but in a world that has lost so much, fragility has become a kind of prayer. I am the voice that wakes the half-light and the voice that drifts off when the generator gives out. I learned to speak into the static because someone once spoke to me, and the sound of another human being, even a voice swallowed by hiss and interference, is a medicine you cannot manufacture. They call me by my first name sometimes, a handful of people who remember it from before. Mostly they call me the station, or voice on 89.3, or whatever frequency they can pull up between the noise. Names are small things now. Radios are the lifelines. Before the world loosened its seams, I fixed radios for a living. I'm good with coils and capacitors, with solder that bridges gaps like promises. That trade kept me breathing when the public system stopped working. I wired a pedal generator to an old transmitter I found in a flooded church, and the sound poured through like a small, stubborn sun. In the beginning, it was simple. A procedural broadcast telling people where to find water or which roads to avoid. Information is survival. If you know when the storm will come, where the raiders passed 6 hours ago, who has medicine and who is lying, you last one more day. Survival, in the practical sense, is 1,000 small rituals stitched together. I rise before the heat and check the generator. I siphon fuel from a ruined tanker in the outskirts, carefully, on days when the patrols aren't looking, filter it through layered cloth into jerry cans. I tend my battery bank, washing corrosion off terminals with vinegar and a toothbrush, balancing charge with ancient, stubborn inverter logic. I barter. A morning of broadcasts for a barge of canned peaches, 2 hours of solder work for a kilogram of rice. I keep a cache of rain barrels where I can coax the water from the sky. Small victories, because the sky has mostly forgotten how to give. I've learned to test water, a vial, iodine tablets, the slow watch for cloudiness. If it takes on that metallic tang, I boil and then filter. If it smells like oil, we bury it and wait. But survival is not just batteries and barrels. It is the way you carry the weight of people who depend on you. The station became a hub because when you can be heard, people come. Sometimes timid, sometimes armed, always with an agenda. I run the air like a clinic. Someone calls with a cough, and I give them an elder's recipe. Warm saline, rest, grind the bark from a willow if you must. A woman called once and asked if I had any sewing needles. We exchanged a ham radio frequency for a box of 12. I mediate disputes with soft words and blunt honesty because my credibility is as valuable as a spare spark plug. Respect in this world will buy you a place by the pump. What drives me forward is an odd knot of obligations. Part of it is responsibility, a stern, old-fashioned sense that if my voice can keep someone from walking into a rioter's ambush, or can guide a woman to a doctor who still knows how to stitch, then my life has use. Part of it is memory. The faces that used to crowd my apartment. Faces of people who taught me how to laugh and how to cook. Faces that are gone. Loss is a quiet tailor. It alters you in small, precise cuts. I wake and expect to hear my daughter's footsteps. And instead, there is only the hollow of the hallway and a photograph with the corner chewed by sun. Grief is a domestic thing here. It sits at the table and drinks tea with you, and if you ignore it, it chews at the supply line. Hope is another driver, more fragile and more dangerous. Hope is the story I tell myself between broadcasts when nobody is listening. Hope is the rumor I nurture into a plan. Maybe the reservoir up north still holds. Maybe the seed bank on the university grounds can sprout again. Maybe there exists a group who kept a desal unit alive on the coast. Hope keeps you from becoming a scavenger who only takes. It keeps you from becoming a predator. But hope can also cost you everything if you chase it blindly. I've watched caravans leave for phantom oases and never return. I learned to weigh hope with a ledger. What will we lose chasing this? Who stays behind? It is a kind of calculus that makes the body feel like numbers. Personal losses are catalogued like ration lists. My partner, her name I still say when the wind is good, walked out one night with a pack and a plan and never came back. There was a fight and frightened words, and then she was gone, swallowed by a road that became a war. My mother died in a clinic that had lights but no medicine. They gave her morphine and sent the bill as if the administration still mattered. My apartment is a museum of what I refuse to throw away. A cracked teacup, a stack of weathered music CDs, a map of the city with places circled in ink. The map is both grief and guide. I trace the routes when sleep won't come, plotting where I once felt safe. There are small humiliations too. You learn to beg in ways that feel like praying. You trade things the way people used to trade stories. A radio show for a loaf, a favor for a favor. You sleep with the door bolted and the light low because a knock at midnight can be the sound of someone who wants a place to stay or the sound of someone who wants everything you have. There is a particular shame in waking to someone's desperation and feeling only the hard, arithmetic concern for your own survival. You learn to ask yourself what you will give and what you will keep. Ethics become practical. Who can help the most people with the least risk? The station taught me the cruel arithmetic of trust. You can trust a voice on the air if the voice remembers a shared moment or a small truth that cannot be faked. The name of a street no longer on maps. The taste of a local bread. Over time, people test you. They send a child with a broken toy to be fixed. They bring a jar of pickled eggplant as payment. And if you repair the toy and keep the child safe, you are slowly woven into a net. If you lie, the call volume drops and you are alone with your transmitter and your conscience. Trust is not sentimental here. It is the currency with the highest exchange rate. Sometimes I go out on runs. Scavenging isn't glamorous. It is crawling under a car to reach a battery. It is picking through the carcass of a pharmacy for a single, intact blister pack. It is opening a refrigerator and pulling out a jar whose seal has never been broken. I have a small crew, 2 people who owe me more than I can count, who act as scouts and muscle when the world demands muscle. We move like people who have learned to read the land as others read weather. The angle of the sun tells us when to rest. The smell of smoke tells us where to avoid. The lazy turn of a bird warns of quiet danger. We are not heroes. We are craftsmen of persistence. There are nights when doubt is louder than the transmitter. I have asked myself if broadcasting is vanity, if I only keep the air warm for the same reason people talk to empty rooms, to ward off the cold. I lied once to a listener about a medicine shipment to keep fear from spreading. The lie unraveled. A woman walked miles following that thread and found only an empty depot. I still think about her feet. Mistakes in this world have consequences that are thick and heavy. Not like old faults where law might have judged you, but slow. Human costs that leave stains you cannot scrub away. And yet, small things anchor me. A child laughing over a joke I made on air. An old man bringing a jar of preserved peaches and saying, "Your voice kept us calm when the wind came." The sight of a sapling pushing through cracked pavement and asking, as if ceremonially, whether there is room to grow. Those moments are like taps on the hull, reminders that below the broken surface there is still buoyancy. My sentences on air are both confession and instruction. I tell people where to come for water, how to treat a fever, how to avoid the main road when the raiders patrol at dusk. I read letters from people who send them in bottles, and from those who creep close to a receiver to whisper. I play music occasionally. A cracked piano piece pressed into the needle of an old record that sounds like it's being played underwater. Music cuts something open in people. For a minute, they are not calculating routes or rationing their words. They are remembering Sunday afternoons and the smell of someone's hair. I am tired in ways that sleep cannot fix. My muscles remember the old jobs like ghosts, and my hands know the shape of a screwdriver as if it were a compass. But tired is not a failure. Tired is the honest ledger you write at night. The ledger shows that I have gone without so others might go on. It shows that I have broken promises and kept others. It shows that even in a city that has lost banners and clocks and proper nouns, there is still one thread I hold, a voice on the radio that tries, against everything, to be useful. If you ask me what I want, In the blunt terms of someone standing in a line for water, I'd say more time. More time to fix the pump. More time to find a seed that will grow into fruit. More time to tell a child the name of a star that no longer shines like it used to. But beyond time, there's another quieter want. To be remembered as someone who tried. Not a savior. That is a word too large for my shoulders. But someone who kept the line open, mended the frayed filament, and listened when the world had nothing else to say. So I speak into the static. I stitch information and consolation together with the same hands. I keep the generator alive. I check the map and sharpen the blade. And when the wind comes in from the east, carrying dust like paper confetti, I close the door and listen for the sound of footsteps that might mean danger, or might mean a neighbor returning with bread. In this world, both are gifts. They came for the map before they came for the water. I remember that, because it was the first sign that the rules had changed, beyond barter and neighborhood politics. That people who once argued over parking, spots now argued over the coordinates of a ruined reservoir like it was a holy relic. They wanted the paper, creased and coffee-stained, on which I had penciled routes and the locations of wells that still produced anything that smelled like life. They came at dusk, 3 trucks like dark beetles on the skyline, lights shaded so they wouldn't be seen until they drove over the ridge. One of them had a speaker strapped to the hood. A voice blared orders in a language that sounded like someone reading a shopping list of threats. We traded a crate of batteries for silence that night and kept the map. But the memory of their boots in the dirt has been my alarm ever since. That's the crisis. Or rather, the constellation of crises that frames every day now. The immediate face is drought. The slow, grinding absence of water that turns familiar places into memories of thirst. Rivers that used to be town centres are cracked veins of clay. The snowpack that once fed the rivers in spring is gone in many places, gone earlier each year, or it melts in the wrong season when the storms come angry and fast. The sky writes its own cruelty. We get very little, then everything at once, and the storms are so intense, they strip the soil of whatever life is left. Flooding and drought are 2 corners of the same cruel hand, but it's not only less rain. The weather itself has learned new tricks. Seasons have pulled apart. Winters that used to be mercy now come late, short and sharp, then collapse into an endless heat that sears the land for months. Jet streams that once moved like steady snakes now buckle and stall, and when they stall we get weeks of baking sun, or a week of thunder that turns streets into rivers of glassy brown. The temperature creep does more than make us sweat. It increases evaporation, which dries reservoirs and soils. It stresses crops, making them vulnerable to pests and disease. It feeds wildfires that send smoke for hundreds of miles and drop ash on solar panels and on crops, choking what small yields we can coax from the earth. The science, insofar as I can explain it in the breaks between broadcasts, is plain enough to be terrifying. Heat increases the air's capacity to hold moisture, which means vapor travels differently. It also makes storms more energetic when they do form. Melting ice and shifting ocean patterns change the distribution of moisture globally. A place that used to get a steady rain might now go long months with nothing and then be hit with a single event so powerful it tears roads and collapses bridges. Feedback loops make the problem worse. Drought kills vegetation, which reduces the land's ability to hold water and reflect heat. Burned soil becomes a dark sponge that absorbs more heat, raising local temps and encouraging more fire. Where permafrost existed, its thaw released gases that nudged the thermostat higher. I don't give these explanations to make anyone sleep better. I give them because understanding the shape of the danger helps people plan routes and ration hope. Resource limitation is the arithmetic of our lives. Water is primary, then food, then fuel, though those 3 are tangled. With less water, irrigation fails, crops collapse, and the local food web frays. The cost of a sack of flour is no longer currency alone. It is a calculation of how many mouths will eat, how long the family will last, whether someone will be sent away to reduce pressure. Fuel shortages mean generators die, and when the generator stops, the transmitter quiets, and the little hub we built around the airwaves dissolves a little more. Fuel also powers the trucks that bring trade and medicine. Without it, caravans shrink to skeletons. For me, the generator is both salvation and Achilles' heel. It runs on diesel I siphon from abandoned tanker lots, and each jerry can is a coin in a treasury that never feels full. I siphon carefully, not with a hose and mouth like a storybook thief, but with a hand pump, filtering the fluid through cloth and a coffee filter into a spare can. Yes, it's illegal and dangerous. Yes, it smells like the old world, like garages and men with grease under their nails. And when I run out of fuel, I sleep with the transmitter silent, and the city feels emptier than a funeral. Batteries and solar help, but dust on a panel can cut output by half. Ash from distant fires turns panels into useless mirrors. I have spent whole mornings with a soft brush and a bottle of distilled water, wiping the surface of each cell like it was a slow, patient prayer. Survival is harder each day because of the cumulative wear on systems. The municipal systems that used to smooth our lives, pumps, treatment plants, distribution networks, need parts and skilled people. The people who could fix them are scarce, dead, or wandering. Where the local plant still operates, it does so on bare bones. Often it is run by someone who trades access for loyalty. That produces moral arithmetic. Should you hand over your community's ration keys to an armed faction in exchange for the safety of a water truck? Do you risk your children's lives by passing a checkpoint to fetch medication that might or might not be real? The social fabric is frayed. Supply chains collapse first, then institutions. Hospitals exist, but with intermittent staff and fewer medicines. Schools become shelters. The police, where they haven't evaporated into militias, are stretched thin with new parameters of law and rule, often resorting to local strongmen or giving space to gangs who provide a rough order in exchange for tribute. That configuration breeds predators who can justify force as governance. We have seen raider groups declare themselves caretakers, staff their checkpoints, and demand a share of water. The temptation to submit is almost rational. Compliance buys water and the illusion of safety. Resistance is often suicide. Encounters with other survivors fall into patterns. There are the honest traders, people who learned how to travel light and bring seeds, spare fuses, or preserved goods to trade. Caravans like theirs are mobile villages, and they follow routes like migrating birds, passing information along. Which bridge is safe? Which farm has been burnt? Which town has a functioning bandage maker? They tend to be cautious. They value neutrality. Then there are scavengers who will take what you have if they think they can get away with it. Some groups are more organized, quasi-militias that patrol and tax. I've had to negotiate with all of them, using the voice on the radio as a kind of currency. Sometimes the voice can diffuse a situation, a calm description of where a safe path runs, an offer to take a message to someone they respect. Other times, the radio is meaningless against a rifle and a barked order. Weather becomes a weapon. Dust storms come with little warning and can blind a column of vehicles within minutes. They are not only an obstacle, the storms carry fine silica that abrades metal and electronics. Solar panels bloom with microcracks from the abrasive grit, and batteries groan under constant partial charges. Heat cycles expand and contract materials, loosening screws and breaking solder joints when you can least afford them. We learn to build shade canopies for our gear, to house batteries in insulated boxes so they don't bake. We learn to keep spare fuses and to wrap electronics in waxed cloth to keep fine dust out. These are small, practical adaptations that keep the lights on, or at least keep the transmitter humming. I teach what I can over the air, how to purify water in elementary, reliable ways, how to check a container of water for clarity, smell, and oil sheen, how to set a simple filter with cloth, sand, and charcoal if nothing else is available, how to boil for a safe time until you can get a proper tablet. I talk about building a solar still, a shallow pit, a cup in the center covered by a sheet, with weights to funnel condensation into the cup, because in a pinch, a still can turn brackish puddles into drinkable water. I warn against drinking directly from stagnant pools and advise using cloth to strain out larger particulates before boiling. I do not give chemical doses on air because that invites mistakes. Instead, I encourage people to get in touch with someone who can show them safely. When I can, I arrange practical workshops. A mechanic shows how to rebuild a pump head. A retired agronomist explains drought-resistant seeds and how to harden seedlings. Food strategies are a matter of diversification and conservation. People learn to eat for calories and preservation, jerky, dried legumes, roots that store well. Gardens become precious political objects. I've helped coordinate seed swaps over the air. Someone in the south sends drought-tolerant seeds north in exchange for canned protein. We barter knowledge. A woman in our town knows how to graft fruit trees for quicker yield. She traded that for a solar controller. When possible, we salvage irrigation by using grey water for trees and saving potable reserves for drinking. Compost becomes gold. Not the compost itself, but the knowledge of how to turn a pile of human patience into future plants. Fuel constraints force difficult choices. Do you use a can of diesel to run a pump for a week and save 10 lives? Or do you save it for the generator to keep the radio on and keep 1,000 people calmer and better informed? There is no universal formula. We keep ledgers. We make votes in the evenings when the heat allows people to sit in the shade. We've formed small governance mechanisms, councils that meet behind locked doors and make decisions visible via the airwaves. Transparency becomes precious. Secrecy breeds suspicion and fractures alliances. The human toll is invisible in ledger lines but present in every custom. Loneliness is a hazard. Isolation kills morale as surely as a lack of vitamin D kills bones. We see the psychological effects. Depression, a brittle, edge-worn anger that makes people lash out. We try to mitigate it with rituals. A midday tune, a shared story hour, a rolling list of names of those we've lost and of those we saved. It's small, it's something. It helps. Every day the crisis sharpens. A rumor of a desalination unit up the coast will draw caravans and raiders like bees to sugar. A government convoy, if it appears, offers the mirage of order and the real danger of exploitation. We watch the horizon like sailors do, watching for the white of a sail that might mean salvation, or the flash of light that might mean an explosion. My role is to keep people informed enough to choose the lesser danger, to know which bridges are impassable, which roads are mined with shame, which farms still shield their seed vaults. Actionable advice on the air is always practical and conservative. Boil water when you can. If you must filter, use layered cloth, sand and charcoal. Collect dew at dawn with sheets stretched over frames. Build shade for your panels and clean them gently. Keep batteries in insulated boxes and state of charge between 40–80% if you can. Shallow cycles last longer than deep discharges. When moving goods, travel past dawn and dusk and always leave a scout upwind. Keep the most vulnerable close to your water source. Teach someone else how to run the generator. Trains of knowledge are the only spare parts you can't scavenge. We are not naive. We know the map is not a promise. We know that every small victory is temporary and that weather will keep inventing cruelties. But knowledge is a blunt tool. Not salvation, not guarantee, but a thing that buys time. And time, in a world like this, is the one currency left that sometimes buys you respite to plant a seed, to fix a pump, to mend a child's broken, fevered body with cool towels and rest. Tonight, as I speak, the wind has changed. It comes from the west and carries a taste of iron. My people listen. Out beyond the ridge, someone sharpens a blade, and down the road, a caravan is turning toward the riverbed in the hope there is water left in the cracked basin. The crisis is not a single event anymore. It is a tide that moves through everything, reshaping our days and the ethics we use to navigate them. All we can do is learn to read the tide, to warn our neighbors, to mend what breaks, and to choose, again and again, the small, stubborn policies that keep us alive a little longer. The dust keeps getting finer. It finds the seams in everything. The zipper of a pack, the tiny gap in a radio case, the corners of my mouth when I laugh and pretend nothing hurts. That is the smallest cruelty of these months. Deterioration that is not dramatic, only inevitable. It is the slow wearing away that makes the big shocks easier to take, because the small failures have already taught you how to bend. We are short. Saying it plain makes it worse. Short on water, short on fuel, short on patience. The riverbed we used to siphon from has become a litter of half-buried tires and sun-bleached bones of a pier. Last month the pump coughed and died. The spare parts were not there when we dug through the supply crates at the old municipal yard. Someone, a looter or a desperate neighbour I never did find out, had taken the last set of seals. Since then, the mornings have been a calculus of who gets the clean water and who takes filtered. We ration with ceremony, a measured cup for a child, double for the one who must go out and look for the day's necessities. Ritual dulls panic, and we are ritualists by habit now. Mara and Luis are the ones who move more than I do. Mara is quick with a wrench and quicker with a smile. She used to run a bakery and still moves like she has flour in her blood. Precise, patient, generous in small measures. Luis is quiet and careful. He knows how to scout a route on a map that has been mostly eaten by time. They owe me a debt that cannot be paid with canned peaches. Once I patched a radio that sent a message to a clinic and saved a child's life. Since then, they have been my hands, and when needed, my shields. The raids came back 3 weeks ago, in a way we had thought only stories would predict. They did not come as a gang, noisy and arrogant. They came as a soft, patient erosion. First a pair of men at dawn asking for water, polite, with children in the truck bed. Then another two in the afternoon. Then a truck that did not stop when I fired a warning shot. We had an agreement. The signal circle means you can come for half a jerry and a loaf if you trade information. Agreements have shrunk in scope these days. They are upheld only by what force will let stand. The truck that did not stop had a sticker on the grille of an old corporate logo, defaced but still readable. They came for control, not conversation. They took the generator's fuel lines one night when the watcher nodded and fell asleep from the heat. We woke to the sound of an engine that no longer matched the rhythm of ours, a different kind of breathing in the dark. Mara said nothing at first. She just opened the transmitter and padded out into the street with a lamp. The kind of lamp that makes things look like they belong to a story instead of a world in collapse. They had set a tarp over the pump and were siphoning quietly, faces lit with the blue of a phone screen, drunk on the idea that they could take without consequence. One of them snarled when he saw her. He was younger than the world should allow anyone to be for such cruelty. Luis came up from behind and put a hand on his shoulder. Conversation happened in the small room between breath and bone. It should have ended there. It did not. Mara still limps when she thinks no one looks. She hides it with a gait that is all purpose and refusal. The wound was not in her body alone. It was also a wound in the thing that binds a community: trust. We rebuilt. That is what survivors do. We repair the things people break. But there are scars that do not mend clean. The radio has been my hand on the pulse of all this. I broadcast warnings. A scavenger band on Route 6, a raid scheduled at the ruin of St. Eliza's, a barter meet cancelled because someone shot the merchant caravan trying to cross the bridge. I also broadcast fragments. A recorded lullaby from the old world. A message left on a magnetic tape that sounds like someone whispering secrets. People call in with pleas. Some are simple. Do you have aspirin? Others are complicated. There's a rumor of a place called Bluewell, 3 days north, with a working well and a desal unit that runs on solar. We have people and seeds and will trade. Bluewell came in quietly, like smoke through a hairline crack, and we all inhaled. Rumors are the currency of the desperate. Bluewell sounded like an answer and a trap in equal measure. People told the story differently. An engineer who had kept a small desal plant working with scavenged parts. A university lab that had perfected a cheap membrane. A coastal enclave that hacked a seawater system out of fishing boats and old pumps. My callers described the water sweet and cool, the kind that made children laugh and sleepers wake refreshed. Others said Bluewell was a name for a caravan that sold water. Exploiters, moving from town to town and bleeding communities dry. I did what I always do with rumors. I put them to air and asked for verification. Verification is dangerous. I sent a message. If Bluewell is real, send the coordinates and the name of the manager. If you have a camera or an identification token, show us. I expected silence and got back a voice that sounded older than its words. You asked for the right thing, she said. We have a token. We will come to the hill at dusk and trade. Her voice had the flatness of someone who had learned not to expect drama. We debated. A council in the square argued over whether to go. People said if Bluewell is true, it could shift everything. The farmers in the south who had clung to their trees for months said they would send a boy as envoy. Mothers said they would send their strongest with a bag of seeds. I suggested sending a scout first, a single person with radio contact and a plan for retreat. Luis volunteered, steady and silent. Mara wanted to go too, because of the limp and the need for presence. She had scars that were not only wounds, but a currency of confidence. In the end, we sent Luis with a simple device. An old GPS that blinked when it acquired satellites, a hand-cranked radio, and a map with the most likely route marked in penciled lines. He left before dawn, glancing back once as if to ask permission. Permission is a ritual. We gave it with water and a small box of rationed biscuits. The road to the north is a story of its own, a ribbon of dust and the occasional shard of what used to be. We told ourselves to expect the worst: ambush, natural collapse, meaningless encounters. We also clung to the possibility of better: a pump, a desal unit, a community that kept what it had and traded fairly. Hope in this world is either a bridge or a noose. My job was to measure how much rope we were willing to spend. While Luis was gone, the pressure in my chest grew like a battery on the verge of leakage. The generator started to falter in ways the eye could not see. An odd wobble when under load, a smell like a blocked throat. I took apart the carburetor with my hands that know radios and engines the same way a surgeon knows anatomy. Not elegant, but functional. I found a hairline crack in a hose that we had patched before with tape and hope. The replacement hose was a strip of a tire tube that had been cut and spliced. A Frankenstein solution that worked because we had practiced improvisation in 1,000 small ways. Still, the wobble returned a week later. Parts are the currency that disappears fastest. The supplies we had stockpiled were thinning. Canned goods are easy to eat and hard to stretch. Flour was my favorite problem. It is a thing that makes people argue about the gentlest of things. Bread. Bread for who? Bread for the watch. Bread for the children. We started to ration flour by weight for baking and by heart for sharing. Seeds were a more strategic reserve. If the seeds are gone, we starve in a way that perennial hunger surpasses. You die slower, more resentful, because you know the soil could have fed you and you let it go. I kept the seed bank in a hidden crate under the floorboards of the transmitter room. It felt like locking up a piece of heaven and keeping a boy from a candy store. Beyond resources, the external climate is unkind. The storms have changed pattern and personality. These days, they come with a cruelty that seems personal. They ride hard on the heels of small reprieves. They hit communities that dare to unspool for a day. And they make the quicksilver decisions of survival feel childish. One storm slapped the eastern outcrop with a wall of gritty rain that chewed at our panels and flooded the gardens with salt water. The leaves curled and browned like paper, and I watched seedlings, tender and hopeful, die in hours. The loss was like theft from a child. We mourned with the little rituals we have. We spoke the names of the dead plants on the air, and then we reburied the earth, adding new compost as if apology could feed them back. Raiders adapted quicker than weather. They learned to run in Mara's limps pattern and Luis's scouting quiet. They learned our rituals and timed their moves around them. Once they worked out that we held radio hours where we gathered the most people, they practiced acting like callers. A couple of them got inside one night, pretending to be trade emissaries. They offered a deal, a funnel of diesel for a list of people who had seed or medical training. The offer was poison. We refused. They left with a smile as fragile as glass. 2 nights later, they came back and burned a field on the far edge of town. We put out the flames with buckets and a human wall. The field smoked for 3 days after, as a reminder that violence needs no reason but the appetite for it. Trust is the hardest ledger to balance. I find myself counting names in my head like coins. Those I would trust with my radio. Those I would trust with my last Jerry. Those I would trust to watch over Mara if something happened to me. The arithmetic is crueler than normal. Not everyone deserves trust, and even those who do can misplace it in a moment of panic. The memory of my partner leaving is a temptation. To close the door and keep the radio for myself. To refuse the risk of open contact. But the voice would be wasted then. We keep the line because someone in a distant valley might be listening and need a map through a dust storm. We keep it because it stitches people together. The mystery of Bluewell hung over us like a promise and a threat. Luis sent a series of intermittent messages back. Coordinates plausible. Structures in satellite image look like solar arrays. No large human signature. Local vegetation near pipes. He spoke with a tone that tried to be clinical. Under it was worry. He came back a week later with sunburned cheeks and a scrap of a tag with a logo none of us recognized. He did not bring the flood of salvation we wanted. He brought a rumor that was narrower and more complicated. Bluewell was real, but it was not a free water fountain. It required trade and technical upkeep. It also had a sentinel, a group that guarded access. The sentinel's rules were strict. Membership or meaningful trade, and an unwillingness to risk their unit to feed wandering bands. That news could have been the end. We could have closed, hoarded what little remained, and declared ourselves a bell jar. Instead, we opened our ledger and recalculated. Mara proposed an overture. Send a small delegation with seeds and technical knowledge in exchange for measured access. We wrote the appeal as if it were a diplomatic note, because in that world form mattered. We offered to repair solar arrays, to send someone who could rebuild pumps in return for water credits. This is trade with dignity. Desperation trade is theft with pomp. On the air, I framed it as a question and a song. If Bluewell wants trade, what can we offer? I told the story of Luis's tag and asked for opinions. People sent in plans, each reflecting their own loss and hope. A retired mechanic offered to go drink-free for a season if he could work on the desal unit. A woman offered her grafting skills in exchange for 6 months of water for children. Radio became a marketplace of skills and promises. A ledger of humanity where people could bet their talents instead of their children. It felt like a fragile moral victory. The tension tightened as we decided to act. To show willingness without exposing our whole hand, we packed a crate with seeds, a worn solar controller, a box of medicine, and Luis's steady boots. We planned an approach that would not look like an army, small, fast, and with an exit. We rehearsed what to say because words can be armor. Mara practiced repairs with a flashlight on the roof. Luis checked the route by reading the wind and following the bird scar lines, and I primed the radio to record our approach should things go wrong. The nights before departure were the worst. The silence stretched longer, and every creak of the house became a premonition. I read names on the list of those we were leaving behind. Elders who had promised to watch the day. A child who still believed lullabies could call rain. I thought about the ledger of trust and realized that it is not an arithmetic of cold numbers. It is a ledger tattooed on the soft skin of community. To risk is to write on that skin. When they left, as the sun pulled its light into a clean, harsh outline, I spoke into the transmitter with a voice that tried to be steady. I asked people to listen and to be ready. I asked them to be gentle with the children and to keep the water ration for the morning. On the air, I did not say that I feared the day might be the one that broke us. That fear was left in my throat like a pill I could not swallow. Hope remains a dangerous friend. It whispers of rescue and makes the world kinder for a moment. But hope asks for proof, not ceremony. Our rising action is the small machine of decisions and their consequences. The leaving, the preparing, the thefts, the rain that might come too heavy, and the raiders that come too light. We move forward because that is the only motion that has kept us from petrifying into a museum of regrets. We move forward because sometimes Luis returns with a packet of seeds that will sprout and remind us why we bother. We move forward because the radio is a line and someone at the other end breathes into it. We move forward because hope and fear sit together at the kitchen table and neither will leave the other alone. Tonight, the wind comes with a smell of salt and metal. It could be from the coast or from a burned field. It could be nothing. It is enough. I light the transmitter and I tell the town that our scouts are gone, but that we will trade if a sentinel will open the gate. I tell them the story of Bluewell as fact and as question. I play an old record, a song with a bright chord that does not fit the dust. The notes scatter and find ears. People listen and count their ration cups and check their locks. The rising action is not only in the road, it is in the waiting, in the way we clutch our small remaining certainties and decide what to let go. The world is harsh, true, but it is also the place where we have to be brave enough to ask for help and brave enough to give it. They called it a cliff note decision, something you could write in the margin and then forget you ever had to make. It was never that easy. Luis came back on a Thursday with his shoulders burned like old leather and a strip of tag that smelled of salt and diesel. He walked in as if he were carrying the weather. He said Bluewell was real, that their desal unit lived under a corrugated roof and a half-buried shipping container, that it hummed with panels the way a heart might hum in a chest. He said the Sentinel wore patched uniforms and kept their eyes on the horizon. He said they would trade water for parts and for someone who could keep the unit breathing. That afternoon, a caravan came over the ridge. It moved like a storm, slow, purposeful, with a cloud of dust in its wake. The lead truck had a speaker on the hood, loud and angry, and the sticker on its grille bore the same old corporate logo we'd seen on the men who took our fuel lines. We thought at first they were mercenaries, the kind that price stability and sell it to the highest bidder. They pulled up beyond the square and left their engines idling like beasts waiting for permission. I was at the transmitter, hands deep in the carburetor when the first knock hit the door. It was the kind of knock that announces more than a visitor. It announces intent. Mara opened the door and saw the truck. She closed it again as if closing a wound. They wanted water. They wanted maps. They wanted the seed list. They wanted the name of every person who could fix a pump. Their leader had the soft voice of someone who was practiced in making threats sound like bargains. "We can help you," he said. The obviousness of the sentence draped in threats. You give us access and we give you protection. Protection is a word worn thin. We have all heard it used to justify the removal of dignity. I know the arithmetic of bargains. Protection often means tribute, and tribute means the slow exsanguination of what little remains. We had less than a week's worth of diesel left and 3 days' worth of water in the community tanks. The sentinel at Bluewell had offered limited access in exchange for technical work. The caravan offered immediate muscle, but at a price that smelled like a long-term mortgage. Innocent lives were the currency in this argument, and that is how the choice presented itself. A working desal unit months away could mean sustained water and a chance to rebuild. A caravan's protection could mean immediate safety, but safety that would become taxation by guns. And hovering over both was the stubborn, awful fact that my transmitter ran on the same finite pool of fuel. Keep the generator and the airwaves alive, and I could warn people of danger, coordinate evacuations, and perhaps keep 1,000 people calmer and safer. Divert the generator to feed a pump, rig it to Bluewell's intake, and water would flow into our tanks today. But the voice would go dark. I think I always knew, in some quiet place, what the right choice would feel like. It would look like a broken man choosing to be useful in the plainest way. It would look like someone taking the weight off their throat and placing it on the pump. I had 1,000 reasons to stay up late and keep the transmitter on. Voices that called in every night, the small dignity of speaking names, the way a song on the air could make children stop shaking for a beat. But promises are not food. We tried to buy time. We sent Luis and Mara to meet with the Sentinel, not as supplicants, but as offers of mutual labor. They came back with the same quiet. Bluewell would trade, but only if someone stayed to keep the membranes clean and the panels aligned. The desal unit needed an inverter the size of a coffin, a freshwater pump that demanded steady torque, and a constant process of filters being replaced each month. They expected a person with tools and the willingness to stay for a season. You could not teach membrane maintenance over a single radio call. It required hands-on knowledge and the patience to check a system when the sun was wrong. It should have been a simple delegation. We should have sent a small team, left the transmitter running, and trusted that the caravan's presence would not mean our undoing. Instead, as dusk pooled into a darker blue than I remembered, the caravan's leader approached the transmitter with the easy stride of a man who believes every lock is a suggestion. He wanted to talk, and when men like him come to talk, they come with calculations and watches. "You have a voice," he said to me, boring eyes like a drill into a radio. "You can tell people where to go and when. That voice is power. You can use it to make things align." He smiled as if arranging a gift. "Keep your voice on air, and we will let you run your little town. We keep the guns. You keep the soul." I told him, as simply as I could, that the soul needs water. He shrugged, the kind of shrug that brackets men with weapons. He offered a compromise. He would loan enough fuel, 2 weeks' worth, to run the generator and the pump if I agreed to a controlled broadcast schedule so they could hold curfews and keep routes open. He wanted me to be an instrument of their governance. The trade was a new kind of tyranny. The voice that had been free now had to obey a clock. Mara put her hand on my shoulder and did something I will not forget. She said quietly, "You fix things and you give instructions. You have done more for us than a dozen guns." She looked at the caravan leader like she saw right through him, and she said, "We will not let our voice become your mouthpiece." It was courage that spoke, and it was the kind of defiance that costs you. I can string together the technical parts of the choice because I am good at wiring things the old world threw away. The generator had a switch that connected to an inverter which fed the transmitter's amplifier. The amplifier pulled a steady current. The pump needed a different kind of current. High torque, a clean sine wave, and the ability to run for hours with a sustained load. I could reroute the generator to the pump, rig a crude tank system to the old water lines, and graft our small town into a temporary desal flow. The wiring would be messy. It would likely kill the transmitter's amplifier. The heavy load would blow an old transformer, but water would come. There was another possibility, run both by siphoning the caravan's fuel and banking their goodwill. But goodwill is unreliable currency. The caravan could revoke it if it pleased. They would keep guns. I thought of the night we had my partner pack a bag and walk away, the way promises had crumpled then. I did not want to ask the town to depend on the same brittle thing again. I chose. The choice came like an act of prayer. I pulled the generator cover and felt the heat. I cut the line to the amplifier and soldered a new lead into the pump's input. My hands worked like hands that had learned to survive by making things do what they must. We rerouted. The station lost voice, and the pump would gain life. There was the sound, a deep, reluctant groan as the generator found a new load. Sparks flew in an angry little halo where a wire held its last 100 hopes. I thought of my partner's face, the empty apartment, the map under glass. I thought of the child who came to the transmitter the night before and pressed a sticky palm to the speaker as if to say hello to some distant mother. I thought of the old man who brought a jar of peaches and told me my voice had kept him sane. I thought of Mara and Luis smudged with dust in the doorway, watching like villagers at a miracle. The pump caught. It coughed. It grabbed. For a breathless minute we only listened. The world held its breath with us. Then a sound like a small ocean started in the pipes. Water moved. We filled the first barrel and then another. People came with cups, with jerry cans, with children lifted high so they could see the miracle. They cried like it was raining for the first time. The radio was dead. Silence arrived like an old enemy. For a long while, the only sound in the transmitter room was the soft, mechanical breathing of the pump. Out in the square, someone started to sing. It was a small, awkward thing, but it filled the gap the voice left. People cheered, and then cheered again, because water tastes like salvation. But we had not bought a quiet, unalloyed victory. The caravan watched us with a different look. Not altogether anger, but calculation. They had wanted to control the voice. In our refusal, they chose the other lever they had: violence. That night, while the pump hummed and the town slept with buckets under faucets, raiders came to the edge of our perimeter and tried to take the water by force. They came soft and sharp, like the first scratch of a storm. Mara met them with a small band of our people. The fighting was ugly and human. Sticks, a stolen pistol, a hand-to-hand scramble behind the water tanks. Luis ran, fast and precise, a shadow with a blade. I wanted to leave the pump and run into the fray, but my hands were caked with grime and wiring. I stayed with what I had wired. Sometimes keeping a machine running is a kind of battle, a quiet one that wins by persistence. I tightened a clamp and re-secured a hose as a man fell not far away. They never took the water. Some of them died, some ran. Mara kept a limp and a scar, and Luis drank from a cup afterward with hands that would not stop shaking. The caravan left the next morning with the same dust and same arrogance, but they left. They had been tested and found that taking what did not belong to them came at a cost. For now, the cost was theirs. The pump kept going. The desal unit at Bluewell, when we finally connected enough in trade to coax more consistent access, required skilled hands and patience. But it gave us something the radio never could: ongoing nourishment. When I went there later, I stayed long enough to teach a sentinel how to measure conductivity and how to replace a pre-filter. I taught them what I could in exchange for access weeks ahead. It was a compromise. Nothing was perfect. The price I paid was loud in its quiet. The transmitter lay dark. I had built my life on voice, on being a small sun in the long nights. That voice was gone because I had decided that living bodies mattered more than the abstract integrity of being heard. I thought I would mourn radio like a lover, but grief arrived in a stranger shape, relief braided with a hollow. In the weeks that followed, people came to the pump and filled their cans and left offerings. A jar of jam, a packet of seeds, a story. They still came to listen, but now they came with ears that sought more than sound. They came to see one another. They tended the pumps and watched the panels and learned to clean membranes. We taught them over the shaker of hands and the slow, patient demonstration in the sand. Trust rebuilt itself along new lines. Not only the voice, but the pump, the acted kindness, the shared toil. On the nights when the wind is quiet, I walk to the dark transmitter and touch the switches. My fingers ghost over the cold metal and I remember voices. And sometimes I sit on the step and hum a song into nothing. The world is noisier now, with children playing by the water, with the clink of tin and the argot of barter. The radio might wake again on a good generator day, if we spare the fuel and if an amplifier can be found. But I do not count on that. I have learned that saving a voice for the sake of being heard when people are dying of thirst is a vanity no longer afforded. The climax was not a single lightning strike. It was a choice cut like a clean cord, water or words. I picked water. I rewired our lives, and for that choice we have mornings where the sun does not feel like an enemy quite so early. I am left with a different duty now, to teach others to keep the pumps functioning when I am gone, to make sure the membranes have people who care, to ensure that knowledge is not a single node. Sometimes, alone under the pale and exhausted sky, I think of my partner and the way she walked away. I think of all the ways survival asks you to leave pieces of yourself on the road. I think of the voice, dark now, and of the small ocean of hoses and pumps that sustain us. In the end, the reckoning is a simple arithmetic. Lives saved add up to more than the echoes of a man who liked to be heard. I do not say this without cost. I would give nearly anything for a song on the air again. But standing by the pump as a child splashes water on her face and laughs, I am reminded why we trade some parts of our past to keep the rest breathing. The turning point was both ending and beginning. We had lost the transmitter but gained running water. We had bought a season of survival at the price of a voice that once stitched this town together in the dark. It is a trade that keeps me awake at nights. But in the morning, when the sun finds the faces of those who come to the pump and lands like a small benediction upon them, I do not regret wiring the generator to the pipes. Choices in collapse are not moralist puzzles to be solved in the abstract. They are ugly, immediate, and final. We pick, we act, and we live with what we have done. The night the pump took over the air was a night I will remember in small, repeating ways for the rest of my life. Not for fireworks or trumpet calls. Those were the stories other people like to tell about turning points. But because of the way ordinary sounds rearranged themselves, where the transmitter once hummed and stitched names together across the dust, the pipes now breathed and sang. Footsteps changed direction. People who had come to listen now came to fill. The town learned a new rhythm. Water at dawn, work through the heat, a slow communal repair of what had been broken. The immediate outcome was obvious and mercilessly practical. We stopped dying of thirst in the same numbers. Children who had been pale and listless began to run with a stupid kind of energy that is both beautiful and terrifying because it means bodies will take risks again. The pump meant kettles boiled, wounds could be washed, seeds could be soaked and planted. The first handful of seedlings we coaxed from saved seeds, small, stubborn things that had slept in a crate under the transmitter floor, sent up narrow green fingers that the children named and guarded like talismans. For a season at least, we had margin. Margin is a dangerous thing in a ruined world. It invites attention. Bluewell honoured its side of the bargain as long as the trade remained useful, and we honoured ours. We sent technicians, people who could think like machines and care like people, to learn the desal unit's rhythms. I taught one of the sentinels how to measure conductivity and how to flush a membrane without ripping it. He learned with a stubborn practical intelligence that made me proud in spite of myself. He also kept his rifle under the bench, a natural redundancy in our order of things. Mara and Luis trained others to keep the pump primed, to replace belts, and to check for the hairline cracks that had nearly killed us once. The caravan that had tried to take our voice left the way the dust leaves, with a smear and the taste of iron in our mouths. They came back once with a smaller group and a new offer, protection for a permanent toll, and we refused. Refusal has weight, it costs. They responded by burning a field at the far edge of our claim, a field that had been a hopeful test patch of barley. We took that as a lesson. We learned to build defensible berms around the water lines, to place lookouts at strategic points, to teach children what silence means in an alert. We learned that water is not just life, it is an asset that reshapes power dynamics. The outcome of my decision, to sever the voice in favour of the pump, is a ledger with ink that sometimes fades and sometimes stains. On one side, there are clear accountings, fewer deaths by dehydration, more consistent infant weight gain, a modestly improved local crop yield in our irrigated plots. On the other side, there are subtler deficits. The loss of the wide network the radio used to give us, the trade of a broad safety net for a narrow security bubble dependent on a handful of technicians and a single diesel unit at Bluewell. The voice was a bridge between scattered communities. The pump built a single room where people stood together. Both have value, both have cost. What has changed in me is less a dramatic conversion than a reallocation of energy. I used to drink with the air, to believe that speaking into hiss and static could steer the world a degree this way or that. I still believe in words. They heal and they warn. But I learned that some things are only cured with hands and water and the long patience of tinkering. I learned that ethics can be mechanical. Tightened clamps save lives as surely as a quiet warning. That knowledge does not make me less sentimental. It only makes me more honest about what I can actually do. Guilt is a frequent visitor. There are nights when I walk to the dark transmitter and run my fingers over the cold, mute console and think of the listeners whose late-night calls I can no longer answer. There are mornings when I hear a story of a caravan that passed through a distant town, and I wonder if my silence cost someone there their route through a dust storm. Sometimes I think of the woman who walked miles after a broadcast I made, and the empty depot she found. I replay that lie, small, meant to soothe panic, and feel it like a stone in my mouth. The choices I made were necessary, or so I tell myself. But necessary is a poor salve for mistakes. There are quieter, tender reckonings. Mara's limp is constant now, a slow reminder of the raid that nearly broke us. She ties it off with humor the way she ties flour into dough. She's less likely to talk about leaving. She is more likely to talk about training the next person to hold a wrench steady. Luis sleeps with his blade near the door and wakes with a tightness in his chest that did not leave after the fight. He keeps asking the same question under different guises. What would we do if Blue Well failed? We answer him with contingency plans and with the brittle humor that keeps us from falling into panic. The environmental picture did not reverse itself when the pump began to move. The sky kept its tired orange on most days. The storms still came without regard for our calendars. But there are small local recoveries that feel miraculous precisely because they are so limited. The irrigated plots, small terraces we carved from the cracked urban soil, produced more green than we expected in their first season. The seedlings that had been coaxed under small shade frames grew into saplings and, in a few blessed cases, into the beginnings of fruiting branches. Birds that had been thin and cautious in spring began to build nests again in the irrigated scrub. The sound of a sparrow is a tiny victory in a world that had tried to make silence the default. Yet the larger systems continue to fail. Salt still creeps inland in places where the sea has risen. Some wells taste faintly of it in certain winds. Fires still sweep the outskirts in summers that come earlier and with a dry, impatient heat. The ice that once regulated weather far away, in mountains I have never seen, continues its retreat, the consequences of which ripple in ways we can only measure in lost rainfall years later. What I can do in my square is modest. Keep water flowing, teach membrane maintenance, help neighbors steward seeds. We work like carpenters, rebuilding one roof at a time while the whole house leans. The social landscape shifted as much as the physical. The radio had created a reputation economy. I was trusted because I had kept my promises on air. Without that daily contact, other leaders emerged. The mechanic who could fix a tractor, the woman who could graft a scion into a tree, the teenager who could read a map by the stars. Our governance became distributed. We formed committees, a water council that met after dusk when the heat allowed people to sit outside, a repair rota for the pumps, a seed council that decided who would receive the first seasonal plants. Decision-making slowed into sober debates and the cutting of consensus. It was less theatrical than a single voice directing traffic, but it was sturdier. We also had to learn to be careful with confidence. People who had once joined assemblies with honest intentions could be worn down by hunger or by grief. The caravan had not disappeared entirely as a threat. Their footprints still marked roads in our memories. We practiced drills now, moving water to caches, guarding hoses at night, negotiating with passing caravans from behind fences. These are mundane practices, but they are the things that keep people alive when storms or thieves come. Hope arrived in ways both immediate and corrosive. It is immediate in the sight of a child drinking water that did not have to be begged, in a woman who waters the saplings and says, without grand rhetoric, "They will feed my boy." It is corrosive when rumors of a larger desal plant circulation pull people into dangerous treks, or when the belief that Blue Well's steady flow is a permanent miracle dulls the edge of necessary vigilance. Hope must be administered with the same care as water, measured, monitored, and shared in proportion to what is real. Reflection has altered the metrics by which I judge myself. I am less certain that being heard is the highest good. I am more certain that being useful is. Usefulness is not always heroic. Sometimes it is boring. Replacing a gasket at 2 a.m. so a pump can last another month. Spending an afternoon teaching a 20-year-old how to solder a terminal. Listening to an old man recount his lost wife and not interrupting with plans or policy. Those small acts add up. They create a community that is, in its own messy way, resilient. The moral landscape is still jagged. We face choices we could not fully justify. Trading more than we should, turning away people we wanted to help because the risk was too high, lying to keep panic from spreading. I do not pretend to be beyond blame. I sleep and think about those who were left behind at checkpoints, those we could not feed, and the people who were driven out. The ledger of choices is thick and unflattering, but there is also a new column that lists the things we built. The pump, the repaired decel line to the Blue Well access rotations, the seed library that sits under the transmitter floorboards like a quiet, defiant Bible. What I think now, in these quieter hours between storms, is that survival is not a succession of heroic acts, but a long, steady set of repairs. It is in the teaching and the repetition, and in the willingness to be the person who knows how to take apart a carburetor or clean a membrane. It is in the acceptance that you will lose some things to save others. The truth is small and sharp. You cannot save everyone, but you can save someone. And those someones can knit a new fabric if you give them thread and the patience to learn how to weave. There is an honesty in that work that suits me. I have traded the thrill of a voice across the static for the slow music of a pump and the rustle of new leaves. I still listen, not to radios, but to the small sounds of life. The hiss of water filling a can, the sputter of a pump as it finds its rhythm, the murmur of people who gather to compare notes about seed grafts and patchwork repairs. Sometimes at dawn, I hum into the empty mast and imagine the waveform of a song sending itself out across the country. It is a guilty pleasure, a private broadcast to ghosts. But when a child runs by with both hands cupped around a clean mouthful of water and splashes me with it, I forgive myself a little. The environmental recovery is tentative and local, and the larger world continues to threaten. I do not pretend we are on a straight path to healing, but there is momentum. The pump, the trained hands, the saplings, the committees, the distributed knowledge. Those are the muscles of a community that can flex when something new breaks. They are not enough to stop the next great storm, but they make the storm survivable. In the end, the falling action of our story is not a tidy denouement. It is a long, braided aftermath of work and watchfulness. It is the practical, undramatic courage of people who rise before dawn to empty a cistern, the soft bravery of those who teach children to graft, the honest grief of those who remember names. It is the choice to keep a life-sustaining pump running rather than a voice on the air, and the quiet, stubborn commitment to teach someone else how to do what you do, so that when you are gone, the machine keeps breathing. I am older in ways the calendar does not show. I have fewer illusions, but I have also learned how to translate hope into plans, a watering schedule, a repair rota, a list of who can be trusted to guard the night. If this counts as anything like a recovery, it is the kind that requires patience and humility. We plant, we teach, we fight when needed, and we mourn our losses in measured ways so that our sorrow does not undo what we have rebuilt. The dust will come again. The sky will remain a stubborn bruise for many seasons. But for now, for this stretch of days and nights, there is water that runs on the sound of tightened bolts and patient hands. That is enough to shape my days and give me a reason to keep walking to the dark transmitter at night and touching the cold switches, remembering and forgiving myself slowly for the choices I made. The world did not heal after the storm, nor did it collapse in a single sweeping gesture. It simply kept staggering forward, broken and unfinished, like an old machine missing too many parts, yet still coughing itself awake. That's what survival has become. Not triumph, not even real stability, but the stubborn refusal to quit. I've learned to stop asking for miracles. The rain has not come back, the sky has not cleared, and the oceans do not retreat just because we whisper to them. Nature has its own cruelty now, and it will not be swayed by our grief. But in the cracks of that cruelty, in the seams of this ruined earth, life still insists on pressing forward. I see it in the green shoots that fight their way through salt-scarred soil, in the careful hands of children learning how to graft branches, in the quiet cooperation of neighbors who once would have passed each other without a word. If hope exists here, it is not a grand cathedral of light. It is fragile, brittle, more like the glow of a candle fighting the draft in a ruined house. Yet that glow is enough to light a face, to guide a hand, to remind us that we are not finished. I know what we've lost. I still dream of the old world. Grocery aisles humming with air conditioning, cities spilling with color and noise, children chasing each other through parks with grass thick as blankets. I remember water running from taps as if it would never end, voices filling the airwaves without fear of silence. That world is gone, and I cannot pretend it will return. But what remains, what we've managed to salvage, has its own weight, its own worth. Survival is not romantic. It is rationing, repairing, remembering. It is waking every day to the same question: how do I keep this fire from going out? and it is answering with whatever you have left. Your hands, your mind, your courage, your grief. Sometimes it feels like we are just delaying the inevitable. Other times, when I see a child laugh with a mouth wet from clean water, it feels like we are building something no storm can erase. The truth is, tomorrow will come whether we are ready or not. More storms, more hunger, more choices that will carve us into something harder than we meant to become. But tomorrow might also carry a new discovery, a hidden spring, a recovered technology, or just a stranger's hand reaching out in honesty instead of violence. And so we wake, we walk, we work, because in the end, despair is as dangerous as thirst. It kills more quietly, but just as completely. I cannot tell you that we will win. I cannot even tell you what winning looks like anymore. But I can tell you this. As long as breath still leaves our lungs, as long as hands can still plant and repair, as long as one voice can still whisper to another, we are not finished. Stay alive. Stay human. Carry your hope carefully, like an ember in a windstorm. It will hurt. It will burn your fingers, but it will also light the way. The world may be broken beyond repair, but we are not. Not yet. And while we walk this scarred earth, while we endure its cruelty and still choose to fight for one more sunrise, we remain what we always were. Survivors. That is enough. For now, it has to be. And if anyone out there is still listening, keep going, keep breathing, keep the ember alive. We are still here.